In 2017, India introduced electoral bonds to reform political funding. The goal was transparency and accountability in political donations. Issued by the State Bank of India, these bonds could be purchased by various entities. Donors' identities were kept confidential, sparking debate. Critics argued it allowed unaccounted funds into the system. Bonds had a short validity and were redeemable by registered parties. Despite good intentions, concerns about transparency persisted. The anonymity raised serious concerns about potential misuse. The introduction of electoral bonds was met with immediate criticism from various quarters. Critics argued that the anonymity surrounding the bonds would obscure political funding sources and facilitate money laundering. They claimed it violated the right to information and undermined democratic principles. Concerns were also raised about potential foreign influence in elections. Several petitions challenged the constitutional validity of the scheme in the Supreme Court. In a landmark judgment in 2023, the Supreme Court of India struck down the electoral bonds scheme, declaring it unconstitutional. The court ruled that the anonymity surrounding the bonds violated the fundamental right to information and undermined transparency in political funding. The judgment was hailed as a victory for transparency and accountability in political funding. The court recognized the importance of citizens knowing who funds their elected representatives and the potential for misuse of anonymous donations. The court also expressed concerns about the potential for foreign influence through the electoral bonds scheme. The judgment emphasized the need for transparency in political funding to safeguard the integrity of the electoral process. The 2023 Supreme Court judgment was a significant step towards ensuring transparency in political funding in India. However, the fight was far from over. The government sought a review of the judgment, setting the stage for another round of legal battles. Following the Supreme Court's judgment striking down the electoral bond scheme, the government filed a review petition seeking reconsideration of the verdict. The petition argued that the court had erred in its interpretation of the law and the scheme's implications for transparency. The government maintained that the electoral bonds scheme was designed to enhance transparency in political funding by channeling donations through a formal banking system. They argued that the anonymity provision was crucial to protect donors from harassment and victimization. Furthermore, the government contended that the scheme had been successful in reducing the influence of black money in elections. They highlighted the increase in digital transactions and the decline in cash donations as evidence of the scheme's positive impact. The review petition presented a challenge to the Supreme Court's judgment and reignited the debate on electoral bonds. The court's decision on the review petition would have significant implications for the future of political funding in India. In a setback for advocates of transparency, the Supreme Court dismissed the review petition, challenging the electoral bonds scheme. The court upheld its earlier judgment, ruling that the scheme did not violate the right to information or undermine electoral integrity. The court acknowledged the concerns raised about potential misuse, but maintained that these concerns did not warrant striking down the entire scheme. They emphasized the need to balance transparency with the right to privacy of donors. The judgment was met with disappointment from opposition parties and civil society organizations who had hoped for a more robust defense of transparency in political funding. They criticized the court's decision, arguing that it prioritized the interests of political parties over the need for accountability. The Supreme Court's dismissal of the review petition marked a significant development in the debate on electoral bonds. The judgment solidified the scheme's legal standing, but left lingering concerns about its impact on transparency and the potential for misuse unaddressed. The Supreme Court's decision to uphold the electoral bonds scheme has significant implications for political funding in India. The judgment solidifies this opaque funding mechanism, raising concerns about accountability and the influence of money in politics. The lack of transparency surrounding donors' identities is a major concern. anonymity allows for potential black money flow into the political system. This makes it difficult to track political funding sources and hold parties accountable. The decision is a setback for transparency and accountability in political funding. The Supreme Court's decision to uphold the electoral bond scheme elicited a mixed bag of reactions from different stakeholders. While the government welcomed the judgment, opposition parties and civil society groups expressed disappointment and concern. The ruling party hailed the decision as a victory, emphasizing the scheme's role in streamlining political funding and curbing black money. They reiterated their commitment to transparency and accountability, asserting that the scheme had been implemented with the best interests of democracy in mind. Opposition parties, however, criticized the judgment, arguing that it undermined transparency and favored the ruling party. They expressed concerns about the lack of transparency in donor identities and the potential for misuse of the scheme for partisan gains. Civil society organizations working on electoral reforms expressed disappointment, emphasizing the need for greater transparency in political funding. They argued that the judgment sets a dangerous precedent and called for continued efforts to advocate for reforms that prioritize accountability and transparency in elections. The Supreme Court's decision on electoral bonds underscores the ongoing debate on electoral reforms and the need for greater transparency in political funding in India. While the judgment provides legal clarity on the scheme's validity, it also highlights the challenges in balancing transparency with other considerations like donor privacy. The road ahead requires a multi-pronged approach involving legislative action, judicial oversight, and active citizen participation. There is a need for comprehensive electoral reforms that address the issue of opacity in political funding while ensuring a level playing field for all stakeholders. Strengthening disclosure norms, introducing stricter regulations on corporate donations, and exploring alternative funding mechanisms like state funding of elections are some of the measures that could be considered. The quest for transparency in political funding is crucial for upholding democratic values and ensuring public trust in the electoral process. The debate on electoral bonds serves as a reminder of the ongoing need for reforms that prioritize transparency, accountability, and the integrity of elections in India.